Hello, Dan. How are you doing today?
Doing wonderful, wonderful. Nice to see you and speak with you.
Great stuff. Dan, before we start, then, do you have a favorite quote, motivational insight, or incident in your life which you lived through by and want to share with our audience?
From a quote perspective, and I can't give attribution, it's one that many people probably use, but it's really, really served me well. I guess there's two. One is just because you believe it's true doesn't make it so.
Mm-hmm.
And that's helped me with when I work with departments or employees or staff that I'm not an expert in their field. It's not that I'm crass or don't believe. It just makes me want to search further. Like, is this an assumption or is this quantifiable? So it really is something I use all the time. And then the other is, and again, I can't give attribution, is that in chaos, there is fertility. In
Mm.
chaos, there's fertility. And obviously, we're kind of in constant chaos in this world. And fertility is just, there's opportunity. So, yeah, that really, those two served me really well.
Yeah, that reminds me of my grandmother. She doesn't speak English, but she always used to say this in her native language that whenever there is a birth in the family, there's always chaos. So I'm guessing
Yeah,
it's
love
just
it.
the other way around, right?
Yeah, that's so true.
Great stuff. So then, imagine we are in a room full of founders, early stage builders. They're all waiting for you, hundreds of them. And then you walk into the room. You have the stage. The spotlight is on you. You have the mic. What would you tell them about you, about your story, that they will stick with us for the rest of the hour?
So if I was on that stage, they would know that I'm a serial entrepreneur. And I'm going to go back to that second quote, or tangentially an offshoot of that. Another quote from a TV show, Game of Thrones, is chaos is a ladder. Chaos is a ladder. And I guess it goes back to your grandmother. What would
Yeah.
she say if she was on that stage? And that fortitude and resilience and not giving up, and that there's always within chaos, there's fertility, there's a ladder. And life will hit you in the face, and it's hit me in the face a few times, and there's opportunity. You just always can get through it. There's always a way. And in chaos, you look at it as a ladder. There's always a ladder that can take you somewhere. And I believe there's much more creativity, and for me anyway, in my life, when there are chaotic moments, I get really right brain, and I feel like, wow, this is a great time, especially for a startup founder.
Hmm. Indeed, indeed. So let me ask you this then. In today's world, we see hundreds of gurus, influencers all across social media, right? Not just Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, but also on Threads, which is like really new platform from Facebook, right? Competitor of Twitter. In your opinion, then, why expertise is becoming a better asset than audience size? Because what I've learned recently is that all these social media platforms, they are not pushing the content just because you have followers, because you're a big influencer. What they're doing is they're pushing your content to more people only if they have tangible understanding of your content is really providing value to the end consumers. So let's say, for example, if you created a piece of content, right? You put it on TikTok or YouTube. Before this algorithmic change, what used to happen is you put up a video on YouTube and you have 1 million followers, your 1 million followers will get a notification and they will see it, right? That's how it used to roll. But now it's different. Now what's happening is this video is posted and then they send it to first 100 people in your subscription pool. If they engage with this piece of content, if they comment, if they like, if they sort of watch it completely, then they send it to more 100. But then the next 100 they send is the 50 people in your pool and the 50 people outside your pool. So they're also covering the broader area. That tells me that expertise is becoming a better asset than the audience size, right? So how thought leaders can turn authority into the recurring revenue, in your opinion, in the today's world of economic of influence?
Well, I have a publishing platform, and my clients are what you would call thought leaders, people that have earned that title, not calling themselves that title, true
Mm.
experts. Some are very shy and soft spoken, but full of wisdom, and some are very alpha and full of bravado. So I've seen a thing or two, I'm just observing, of what, so I get a front row seat. The ones that really are making an impact and monetizing their IP, let's just call it that, their intellectual property, they really work at it. I'm not saying it's Mount Everest, but they're not lazy. They don't phone it in. They know that to be on TikTok, to be on Substack is work, and there's going to be ups and downs, and they're constantly tinkering. But that's not the X factor. The X factor I see is trust. Is that's the promise they're making with the community, and that has nothing to do with viral, you know, viral or follower count. Because I think there's a lot of people that can get follower count, and there's not a lot of trust. They're just entertaining, or they're
Mm,
provocateurs. I see that. I believe it's more anecdotally. That's a shorter shelf life, big impact, maybe weeks, months, maybe even years. But there's a lot of, I mean, there's just a lot of people who were established thought leaders that they had to keep feeding that beast. And their expectation was this virality and big count. And I read something today from Seth Godin, who's been around for a while, written a lot of books. And I don't think a lot of his recent books have been big bestsellers,
mm.
but it's just consistent, and there's so much trust. And there's other people like him. So I hope I answered your question. I think that's the real, scarcity is not a thing anymore because there's so much content. There was
Mm,
already before AI, there's a lot of content, and now there's even more. But I think the more vulnerable these people just seem very vulnerable, and I
mm.
that's what I would recommend to other people. Just be who you are, and that's generally will get you pretty far, because that's so not what's in vogue right now, is vulnerability and just authenticity.
Got it. And it is said quite frequently in the founder space that once you have reached to the point where you feel that you are expert in a particular vertical, usually people ask experts or founders or people who are successful any kind of tangent that they should write a book. Book becomes a entry point for a
Mhm.
passive sort of income. The real question here is it really the entry point? And if it is, what is the exact opportunity there? Because publishing book nowadays is not that hard. You write a book and you put it on Kindle or Amazon, right? That works. But the hard work comes afterwards, going on the tours, engaging with readings, maybe having, media appearances, licensing, including some courses, creating some um, AI avatars. For example, one of the guests we have interviewed on the show is Matthew Dix. He is one of the great speakers. He has won 58 Glam Slams in USA for storytelling. He's written around 8 books also around how to talk, communicate your messaging with storytelling. What do you think from a first time publisher's perspective? What they have to think about before even starting to write their first book, or even if they are in the middle of writing their first book? What are the things they have to be assured about to make sure that they don't have out of the world expectations from the
Yeah.
returns?
So you might be surprised with my response here, and I will answer your question, but I think a modern author doesn't necessarily need that book from day one. There's just so many wonderful tools like Substack and others that you can impart your wisdom. And I still think email, your newsletter, your community. People, I don't
Mm.
know about you, I'm still going to my email daily. And if you're interesting, I'm reading it. So if it's 5 people, 500, 5,000, 50,000. So I guess I'm a little, I don't know what the right word is, Pollyanna, but I'm like, just share your wisdom. The great thing about a book, just put all the Kindle and Amazon to the side. The great thing about a book is it's a great repository. It's a great vault of just gathering your raw wisdom. When you start the manuscript process, it's just, excuse my language, vomiting up, just releasing what's between your ears. And it's so easy now. You can record random thoughts. You can, write, big thoughts, in idle time. And pretty soon that's 5,000, 10,000, 50,000 words over months. So it's within reach. So I just encourage people to capture that. The world needs it. The world desperately needs it. In the 90s and early 2000s, we did the Genome Project and we captured all of that. I think we need a genome project for human storytelling and wisdom. But part of the blame is publishing is very intimidating and it's confusing as heck, just hybrid publishing, traditional self. And I think, what we're betting on is that a modern author, that publishing, that aperture is going to open. So book, and I'll stop here, but a book is the way it's done now, just put Amazon to the side, but the printed book and the bookstore and all that, that's a industry of hundreds and hundreds of years old. It's really distribution focused. As I was using Seth Godin wrote, just this week, the bookstore, when it sold a book, it would get another book, it would order another book. And it was a for-profit business, a bookstore. And so it's just a different world and how people consume content. Specifically, to answer your question, I would say your thoughts, wisdom, life experiences. And if you don't feel it right now, just keep in mind your perspective is of value and maybe it's next year, the year after. But if you have an inkling to something's kind of talking to you inside your brain, I would start capturing it now. And that a modern author can start with other vehicles like Substack, et cetera, and come around and do that book, aggregate that, and use AI in a good way to aggregate, organize, help edit. I still highly recommend, if you're ready, to do the manuscript on day one. And the X factor of everything is, I think, as a good editor. I'll stop there, but whatever money you can afford to get a good editor, that's their job, is to make your thoughts coalesce. But they can't create the wisdom and life experiences you had. I think in this world of AI, I'm betting, maybe I'm wrong, I could be wrong, but I think we're going to value originality and authenticity.
Got it. So my partner, she speaks multiple languages, right? So she recently started putting content on Threads, which is a new platform from Facebook. And when she was doing that, she found out she had particular kind of people who are interested in what she writes about. So she writes about travel. So she has been to 60 countries already, and she has these insights of these smaller cities and towns, how to go there, what to do, which sim to buy, things like that. And suddenly what happened is she started gaining quite a lot of traction. So she came back to me and I said, well, why don't you start monetizing it? So she started a Substack now. And one of the Substack she writes about is all about traveling, tips about it. And the other Substack she has is more around paid version of it, where if you get the subscription for the year, then she spends like an hour for consulting part of it. She has already written a book about traveling in her native language, which is Portuguese, and she's planning to write the second version of it. She's doing a writing course from the University of California, and she's thinking to publish it within, let's say, a year and a half. What would be your advice for an emerging writer in this space to think about, to learn about, to kind of structure the whole business in a way that they get the maximum possible value out of it?
So I have one clarifying question. She has a day job or another career in parallel, or this is
Yes,
her
she
career?
does. Yes.
So we'll just take Substack. We talked about that a few times. Substack has grown to, I think, I might be wrong, but well, I won't even say the number, but in 5 years, 2 to 5 million, a big, big number. It's been, it's escalated quickly. It's been a rocket ship. And the OGs of that space, from just a consumer of it, seem to be a lot of people who have succeeded, had a following, or reporters or people of media that came over, some academics and so forth. And the platform has evolved. My take is that its best days are still ahead. I still think it's early. There's an infiltration of kind of, I don't want to call it, people who are just opining, pontificating, I guess. And so there is that, but there's really some sharp voices in there. And what I'm noticing under the sheets is people are learning to monetize it. So you can monetize, per month, per year, and different stages, but that's not first or second nature on, it's for a lot of these people, they just aren't used to being entrepreneurs.
Mm,
So I'm starting to see really a lot more thirst for with our clients, our authors, really experimenting with Substack.
mm,
And even if Substack goes away and there's something else, to answer your question, I think just working that muscle, kind of the rhythm, who you're liking, how they're doing it, looking at people that are successful and not giving up, because it's your intellectual property. You have something important to say, and it's just the 10,000 hours. You just got to put in the work to get that rhythm. And I would say to be agile, because and to pick your swim lane, just two or three. I know people have different opinions, but I get really good at something like Substack, maybe pick another, atomize that content, because I might read someone on Substack, but I would never see them on LinkedIn and so forth. And as far as, and I'll cut to the chase here on really monetizing and making money, I would temper your expectation. I think this is more about reputation building and trust
mm.
and keeping your day job. And quite frankly, making money is really speaking, and I'll hit pause here, but there's other avenues to where, selling curriculum, consulting. So it's a cake recipe, and my cake recipe is going to be very different than your partner's cake recipe generally. So yeah, I would say experiment, and I guess to have a bit of negativity here, be careful about who you follow, because the world's reinventing itself. Not follow online, but getting advice from. I think your biggest teachers yourself, and experimenting more than just paying attention and just feeling bad about yourself because you don't have as many followers. Just kind of put your blinders on, and I think and be, like I keep saying, authentic and
Mm,
vulnerable. Even in the travel section, I think people will adore that, and
great.
think other monetization possibilities will manifest themselves.
Indeed. So, would you be able to take us through the whole process, how you help writers or first time founders in the writing space? What are the things you help them with, and how your services or your product is helping them achieve the maximum growth?
Yeah. So just foundationally, chapters, one portion of our business is an alternative, not a replacement, but an alternative for ghostwriters. You're engaging as a would-be author, you're engaging with one of our editors, a developmental editor, and you're having a series of conversations, and a dozen or so conversations over a few months. We are recording that, and we're using AI not to write your content. We don't have that ability, but we have the ability to organize it, define redundancies, to call out, first person, second person inconsistencies. What this does is it accelerates the process. So the editor can be more present. I'm not saying a ghostwriter is not present, but to have a developmental editor to really think about your story arc and to really be the advocate for the reader. It's just what we hear. It's quite joyful for the author. So the author just shares their wisdom and life experiences through these recorded conversations. We're capturing that. And then we're also capturing if they've written partial manuscript, any blogs they've written, podcasts are on. So we're putting it into this living library. So we're just asking for a couple of months to really just have a lot of great conversation. So, and then from that, a manuscript is born. So the most complicated part about chapters is what I just explained. It's
Mm,
really a simple process. And I think this addresses maybe the initial part of your question. And it goes back to some of your other questions. There is this distribution aspect of, publishing and distribution of your manuscript that will be waiting for you, and you need to think about. But we found, even if we've had our first billionaire client, we've had war veterans, we've had entrepreneurs, all types of people that we've helped with their manuscript. They tend to be kind of amped up at the very beginning. And I get it. This is a big decision to write a book. And so we try to just focus on that. Nothing's going to happen without the manuscript, if you're going to write and publish a
Mm,
book. So let's just spend a few months really thinking through that. And the reason why we say 2, 3 months is, yes, stories have to evolve, and a lot of people advocate, oh, it might take 9 months, 2 years. We have found that the fun is kind of sucked out of it for a lot of people. They get kind of too much into their brain after 6 to 9 months. So we try to get them in a good spot for 2 or 3 months and just focus, and voila, you have a 60, 70, 80,000 word manuscript. So it's actually very, very easy.
indeed, indeed. And for entrepreneurs, then, can they package their decades of hard won knowledge into a scalable content ecosystem instead of like a one time manuscript? Is that possible with chapters, or is it something which you're working on? Or
Yeah, so that's the second part of our business, and that's that living library. So up until us, and there'll be others, but up until now, and even now, you write a manuscript that lives in a Word doc, Google Doc, turns into a PDF, it's printed, audiobooks, ebooks, etc. But it's really a one and done business model. How we do it is we give you those outputs as well, but you also have your own large language model, your own vault, your own living library. And just to grab some numbers, like I said, let's say your book is 60,000 words, typical book, getting smaller now for short attention spans, maybe 40, 50,000 words, but let's say 60, 70,000 words for a nonfiction book, how to, or life story type book. You might, during those interviews and the corpus of what you already have, like podcasts and so forth, might be 150,000 words, 200,000 words. There's a lot of wisdom there. So yes, we help with manuscripts. Yes, we help with publishing, but we're really in the IP business, and to
Mm,
leverage that to be able to what's called atomization, to turn it into blogs, white papers, and so forth. So most of us are not prolific writers and thinkers that have millions of words. Like you mentioned, a speaker earlier that's great at storytelling. He's prolific. He's got 8 books. He's like that just oozes from him. Most of us are, you know, we have a lot to say, but it's not 8 books in a
mm,
short amount of time. But you kind of have 8 books if you really think about, your digital footprint, the corpus of work you might already have out there. So we help leverage that so you can repurpose it. Again, I'll use that Seth Godin as example. I haven't really bought his books, but I read his content all the time because he's a master at that, sharing his wisdom through multiple channels.
indeed, indeed. Although, then traditional publishing still runs on a very slow timelines and bad economics, right? And with the AI, everything is changed. The cost structure is changed. The speed of publishing is changed. The ownership model for expert is changed. It seems like the publishing industry is kind of broken because of AI, or maybe it's other way around. It's the AI which is going to fix it because everything is more
Oh,
faster.
you stole my not a tagline, but I say AI will save publishing.
Okay, there you go.
I agree. I mean, I try to be glass half full or more of an ambassador. So, but I agree with everything you said about publishing. I don't know. It seems like the music business through Spotify, it's kind of taken its evolution, its hit, and it is what, not that's good or bad, but it's newspapers are kind of bleeding and they've kind of started to take their hit. The book publishing, they certainly operate. There's a big book, conference right now in London right now. I've been reading a lot of the daily output and speakers. It's a distribution business. It's still very red ocean, and I'll let them fix that. I'm focused on I'm just looking at a more of a blue ocean. That there's a lot of people out there with some great wisdom, and how do we get that out of their brains? And
Mm.
so you'll be a wealthy man if you can figure out how to save publishing for sure.
Yeah, yeah. And I think distribution is the game now in every industry because if you tackled that part of your business, you are more than halfway through basically because you understood where your
Yeah,
customers are, who's going to pay, and how you can reach out to them. Great.
yeah.
Well, then Before we move on to the second part of this episode, I wanted to ask you something personal. I wanted to ask you, like, throughout your journey and experience, there must have been some valuable lessons learned, right? If you don't mind sharing, could you reflect on your experience and tell us about one of the mistakes or setbacks that you encountered along the way and that you now consider not a regret, but a lessons learned? And additionally, what advice would you give our listeners based on this experience?
I'll be specific. How's that for you? Maybe that'll be
Sure.
helpful. And
Yeah.
I'm going to talk about venture capital, private equity, just capital as a whole. Looking back, I think that if anyone is starting a business, and myself, and I've done like 10 different acquisitions, M&A, been a part of about almost a dozen M&A. That's how I grew a couple of companies, is through acquisitions. I've grown companies just organically and sold, stayed on. And then I, one time, decided to take venture capital money. I got caught up. I got bored basically with kind of what I was doing. And I had an idea, but I thought, well, sounds great to have a board, to use the word again, board of directors, different way of using board, really smart money. And based on my reputation, I was able to raise some seed capital, A round capital. And I just really am not a fan of that business model of venture capital. Just to be blunt, I
And
think
why is that?
they're very smart. How should I say this? Their business model, they're placing bets, and I'll just use round numbers. They're spreading their risk. Let's say it's 12 companies. Each VC generally has one fund, two funds. They might have a lot of funds, tens of millions, hundreds of millions, billions, but depending on the size of the VC. But you're not the only one in their fund portfolio. And they are only hoping for two or three of those companies to be winners. And so on the surface, I get it. It's fine. But there's some real residual inefficiencies, pain, buyer beware, et cetera, that an entrepreneur should consider. So I'll give you two. One is I think all entrepreneurs, and again, if there's this niche Facebook out there or Tesla or something that needs a ton of capital, yes, those type of companies, potential rocket ships that are going to need a lot of capital, I'm going to push them to the side. But for 99% of the other companies, I think it's important to know, in the States, gap accounting, to be profitable, to know what profit margins are and to read a balance sheet and a P&L. I cannot emphasize, and I come from marketing, very right brain. I wasn't even a business person, even doing those M&A. Like I had to learn that, even though I'd studied it and so forth, but I didn't really stick my nose into it. And
Mm,
your numbers tell the story of your business. Your numbers tell the story of your business more than a deck or your website or as much. So anyway, I'll just, out of 2 points I want to make, I'll just end that point that I think it's very important for a eventual successful entrepreneur to really um, know their numbers and know the importance of being profitable, what that means. The other, and I could give 10, but I'm just going to give two here. So that's one related to VC. The other is the numbers I mentioned, 12 companies, two are going to be successful. Let's say there's four that are successful. That means 8 companies out there have founders that after a while you have someone on your board, sometimes owning more of the company, oftentimes than you do after 4, 5, 6 years, and you're stuck with that person. And that the value that they offer is, I'm not an expert at this, but close to it, is near zero at that point. And looking back on my one experience, I wished I was brave enough to really pivot. And I almost think all 12 of those companies need to spend 10% of their time thinking about pivoting at any one time. Just because the world is moving so fast. But the VC, they're going to be, even if you're up to like a 2 million or 5 million recurring revenue, but you're not getting to the 50 million or the 100 million, you're not sexy anymore. You're not sexy
mhm.
at all to them anymore, but that's still enough revenue that they'll want to kind of keep that business model. And that just takes a toll on your family and your friends, on your health. And so anyway, that's my big lesson is that I know it's very attractive, these pitch and accelerator events and being invited. by a lot of these VCs, and someone writing you a check for 500,000, 1,500,000, that's intoxicating. I would stay in the laboratory a little bit longer and
Mm,
get a good lawyer and a good friend to really talk about the pros and cons of that, and see if you can elongate that. Because remember, the math's always been the same. Majority will not succeed. And
yeah,
those people are still going to be on your board and not add any value, but
yeah, yeah.
usually own more of the company than you do.
Yeah. And as it is said in the founders world, and I always speak about it in on the pod also, that the money you raise with VCs or venture capitalist or angel investor at the initiation of your product or service or startup is the most expensive one,
Yeah.
because you're giving up quite a lot which you don't understand, because that's what they're betting upon, right? That's what they're hoping to achieve. Great
Yeah.
stuff. Well, Dan,
And
thank you.
one last thing I'll say on
Yeah.
that little hack here is adopt their business model. Have bets. They're
Mm,
placing their bets over 12. You've fallen in love with your product. You're trying to find product market fit. Carve off 10 or 15% of your time or capital to have another bet or two and incubate those ideas as well. Maybe it's a service. Maybe you're all software. Maybe incubate a service business. So saying respect their business too. They know how to spread out the risk.
indeed, indeed. Okay, great. So let's move on to our quickfire round then. I've got 6 quickfire questions for you. But at any stage you don't want to answer any questions, just give me a skip and then we can move to the next one.
Okay. Do
Yeah.
people generally do a skip or seldom a skip?
There were a couple of people in
All right.
my 200 interviews, they did skip. So that's why I always clear the
Nice.
gap. Right. What are the top 3 strategies for experts, for new writers to follow before even thinking to publish their book in 2026?
Off the top of my head, I would say hyper focus on one idea. You can be more creative with one idea than you can with 5 or 6. So think what you might think it doesn't offer a lot of content. Well, content will just ooze out if you get really specific on one fact. Like you talked about, you asked me, we talked about VC. I could write a book about that. I could do it on M&A. So, hyper focused. That we all are. The enemy number 2, I guess, would be time. It's really, really hard to carve out time for your family, to write a book, to start a business. Get quiet. Find solid. Solace. Is my next thing. Take care of your mental health, and you'll be much more creative. You'll be much more energized. So I'll just give you those 2.
What book would you recommend to our audience and why?
Well, it came out last year and it's one of our authors. So it's called Men Under Pressure. And it's nonfiction, and it was meant more it wasn't heavily marketed. It was, self-published, but I love this book. And it's from a doctor who is, although he's a doctor and very successful, he's also a massively successful entrepreneur
Mm,
and a nice person and a family and had a lot of toys. But silently, he was being crushed every day by anxiety and would often be in the fetal position, often before he would see a patient or talk to people. So he's also very charming, and he used to be a stand-up comedian in college way before. So he has this charm and comedic timing, and the book is, hopefully one or more people will read that didn't think about it before, and it'll save their life or make a difference. Because I know a lot of entrepreneurs, and mental stress is not talked about enough. And it's a great book, and it's a quick read.
What's one attribute or characteristic in your mind of a successful founder?
Well, they generally tend to be overly optimistic. I would say, again, this is a made up number. If you're under 30, question your assumptions a lot, get a lot of feedback from peers, mentors. If you're over 30, depend 100% on your assumptions and intuition. Just go, and you'll fail often. You've lived enough life. It's time. Under 30, question, get any help you can. After 30, 35, just go. And don't be, be reckless, but not in a way that would hurt your family or friends or your employees. But it's okay to break things, as they say.
What's your favorite personal productivity tool or habit?
Well, this is a new one. I would say It's very new. In the last year, I really just try to accomplish 4 or 5 tasks a day that I really want to get done. My days of 50 tabs open, I just was not doing anyone a favor. And sometimes I'll get 10 things done. Sometimes I'll get 3 or 4, but I just started, I went back and got a notebook again. I hadn't had that in years. I'd always had, I still do on my computer, but I just like, okay, I want to get these 5 things done. I'll just feel better about myself selfishly. So that's my hack this hustle culture. No one hustle. I mean, I'm 7 days a week. I squeeze work in all the time, but come on, that's just not, that wasn't good in caveman era, and it's not good now. So it's good to hyper focus and first things first. Get those things done, and you move on to get the other 10 things done if you get those 5 things done.
What's a new or a crazy business idea you would love to pursue if you had time?
I have an idea. I've never told anyone. I probably won't have time. So if it's a good idea to anyone, then take it. I thought of this during the real, explosion of reality TV and Shark Tank and everything. I don't, if people are familiar with like YPO or EO, these, I've been part of groups of other entrepreneurs. So I came up with this idea when I was in one of those groups about 10 years ago. And that is reverse engineer Shark Tank, where I would get 4 or 5 entrepreneurs, and we would go build a business, maybe in a inner city or somewhere where people need commerce and need jobs, and we go in with our capital and start a hair salon, a a t-shirt making imprint company, or something that a restaurant, something that generally we could train others to do, but get it all up, get the accounting up and going, getting revenue in, and then we would hand the keys off to someone else, and they would have to pay us back very favorably. Nothing would be given. It would be a business, but we have these skills, and why not go and start something and have a board of directors and then hand the keys off. So there's my business. I don't know what I'd call it, but reverse engineer Shark Tank.
That sounds like we have a show something like that in England, where there's this guy who goes to a restaurant, a racking restaurant, which is not
Right.
working at all, and things like
Yeah.
that, and he gives them £100,000. But he said that you have to do exactly what I say for the next 90 days, and
Yeah.
most of the time he just make it, you know, he just flips the whole restaurant other way
Yeah.
around, and I guess that's if we.
Yeah, we have a show. Maybe it's the same show. Yeah, so it's similar. I think people do need dignity, and you don't want to give anything away. So it's not that. It's just it's a village, and here's our skills. You have skills, so why don't we put ours to use? So yeah, I think I know that show.
Stuff. What's an interesting or fun fact about you that most people don't know?
Got a big family. I've got a
Mm.
lot of kids. So a lot of people know that, but I have six kids. It's a blended marriage, and they live all over the world. So I'm very fortunate, most in the US, but Singapore and Hawaii and other places. So I have the pleasure to get to see them and experience the cultures and the places they live. So I would say most of my customers and staff, I mean, they kind of know, but that's the important part of my life is that family. So
Yeah, makes sense. Makes sense. Well, Dan, thank you so much for joining me and sharing your story, unpacking your wisdom words about how things work in the book and distribution world. If people want to get in touch with you, what's the best way to get in touch if they have any questions?
yeah, happy to take any emails. It's Dan at chapters, so chapters plural, Dan at chapters.io. And then on LinkedIn, just Dan Curran, and you'll see it with chapters, and love to chat. Our website's chapters.io. And I love talking about publishing and storytelling, et cetera, but I also love talking about startups. So happy to chat about anything and everything.
Great, Dan. Thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your inspiring journey. It's been
Yeah,
an absolute pleasure having you on Founders Podcast.
thank you. Appreciate it.